Is it this way?
This is what happened when I tried to visit all 4 countries of the United Kingdom in a single day. My unique sightseeing mission required a very early start and something to drive. Outsiders may look at our tiny islands and assume that this challenge would be pretty easy. And with the endless roads, train lines, airports and ferry crossings, in some ways it is easier to navigate the British Isles than ever before. But not in the way that I was doing it. To keep things interesting, I set 4 very strict rules for my journey, starting with how I could get around. To complete my mission, I had to cross every new border in a different mode of transport, a rule that would pit me directly against the perils of Britain's unreliable public transport network. First though, I planned to kick things off by road, but there was just one problem. I haven't actually owned a car in about 10 years. So on that frosty morning, I commandeered the most macho car I could find and got the adventure started in style.
And here we go. The journey begins right now. 4 countries, 24 hours in 3 modes of transport. It's a long day ahead.
My quest across the land of hope and glory began on the southern outskirts of Manchester in the northwest of England, where I joined the M56 motorway heading west towards my first target of the day. So this is probably a good time to explain the rest of those rules. As well as changing vehicles for every new border crossing, I had to visit a town or a city in each country that I had never been to before. So for me, that meant no London, no Cardiff and no Edinburgh, which wiped out a few of the easier routes right away. And to say that I'd actually visited each country, I also had to see a genuine tourist attraction at each individual stop with an over 4.5-star rating on Google, all within the strict time limit of 1 single calendar day. So that morning, I was already against the clock.
Now, Manchester, or Greater Manchester, is actually quite well located for a challenge like this because it's really not that far away from the Welsh border, and that's exactly the direction that I'm heading in right now. But first, I want to get England out of the way, and luckily right on my route is the perfect place to stop that just so happens to be one of the most beautiful cities in the whole of the UK, apparently, so should be a good place to start.
As the English sun started to rise, my mint green chariot swung low towards that first sightseeing location.
Okay, it is 6:45 and I've made it to my first stop. So let me find my way out of this car park and then we can do some English sightseeing.
Now, England's green and pleasant land is home to many historic sites and well-preserved ancient cities. But as I mentioned before, this one is consistently ranked amongst the most picturesque. And as I walked into the city centre for the first time, it was easy to see why.
Okay then, here we are. Welcome to the historic Roman city of Chester. And as you can see, it is very beautiful. It honestly feels like I've gone back in time a little bit. It is really stunning, especially at this time in the morning when it's so quiet. I've basically got the whole high street to myself. Now, obviously, at this time in the morning, there's not going to be many tourist attractions open to visit. But luckily, there is something here that's open 24/7, and I just need to find a way up there now, because it's up on the city walls.
Chester was originally founded as a fortress back in the 1st century, and to this day, the city centre is surrounded by 2 miles of walkable Roman ramparts, which not only offers some nice views, but also acts as home to my first official tourist site.
Okay then, here we are. This is attraction number 1, which is the East Gate clock, which sits right on top of the Chester city walls. It was installed in 1897, so it's pretty old, and it's got clock faces on all 4 sides. And a fun fact for you, it's actually the 2nd most photographed clock face in the whole of the UK. Can you guess which one's the most photographed? I'll give you a clue, it's in London.
After grabbing my own snaps of the photogenic faces, I decided to walk a little further along the old defences and take in some more of the morning views.
This is so nice. Oh, sun rising on the city walls. It's turning the buildings all this golden colour. Amazing. I don't want to leave. But unfortunately, I do have a very strict schedule, so let's get back on the road.
It turns out that I'd actually walked a little further along the city walls than I initially planned, so I needed to get a move on, pay for parking and get back on the road sharpish.
£5? Jesus. Okay, next stop, Wales.
That's right, it was time to cross my first border in my first mode of transport.
Now, the next stop is not far away because Chester is right on the Welsh border. But we're now coming into rush hour, which I'd hoped to avoid, but all the pretty things in Chester distracted me. Absolute mugging.
Not wanting to drive too deep into the mountainous Welsh valleys, my plan was to head to one of the closest towns across the border. But first, I had to get out of Chester, where, as expected, that morning traffic was already starting to clog up the historic streets. Luckily though, I wasn't stationary for too long, and I was back on open road, heading directly for that first boundary line.
Any second now, I should be crossing over the border into country number 2. I wonder if there's a sign. There is. Here it is. Welcome to Wales.
So, with blue skies ahead, I had made it into my second country, the land of the Red Dragon. Wales is said to be home of the best singing voices in the UK, as well as the longest place names.
Just up the road from Llanfair to Pwllgwyngyll, go get a Quindrobble, Llantysilio, go.
And I had visited Wales a few times in the past, but for me, this northern region was pretty unexplored. So, the place that I settled on to visit was just 14 miles west of Chester along the River Dee, and a town that has a pretty epic sight to see as well.
Okay then, I have now made it to Wales and the town of Flint, which is right on the River Dee estuary. And because I've made it to country number 2, that also means that the driving portion of this adventure has come to an end. And this is where I'm going to be leaving Minty for the night. He served us well, but now it's time to do some Welsh sightseeing. See you then, mate. It's 8:50, so I've got about an hour until I have to be back here at the train station to get my next mode of transport. And luckily, where I'm going is just down here.
Now, I'd never heard of Flint before I planned this trip, but believe it or not, its most iconic and only 4.5-star attraction is actually even older than the Roman walls of Chester, dating back to the 1200s. And right away, it was exceeding all of my expectations.
Well, literally just behind the train station and through a little housing estate is Flint Castle, or the ruins of Flint Castle. And I didn't actually expect it to be open, but I can see that is an open gate. Well. Check this out. Beautiful ruins with that amazing backdrop of the estuary. Let's have a look around. This gate's open too. This is a bit of a result actually. I read online that it might be closed at this time in the morning, but I can properly explore all the towers and the turrets. Let's get up here. They built these metal staircases inside the tower so you can climb all the way up, even though it's pretty much ruined. And I hope there's going to be a good view at the top as well. Oh wow. Now that is incredible. So that is the River Dee estuary that flows right into the Irish Sea, which I will be crossing later on today. We've got a long way to go before that. The tide's out, as you can see, and it creates these amazing swirling patterns in the water. So for now, let's enjoy these views.
Now, once again, it would have been very easy for me to lose track of time exploring these incredible ruins, but sadly, I had no such time to waste because my next mode of transport was fast approaching.
Well, there we go. 2 countries and 2 attractions down before 10 a.m. We're making good ground, but there's a long way to go. It's 9:15, and I need to get back to the train station to get onto my next mode of transport. And this is going to be a very, very long part of the day. It's the longest journey and the most distance covered. Let's do it.
So obviously it was time for me to head north towards that final border on mainland Britain. As you can imagine, I went through quite a few drafts of the route itself, but what I settled on was to get the train from Wales up to Scotland to cross that divide by rail, before catching a flight across to Northern Ireland, where I could hopefully end the day with a pint of Guinness, knowing that I'd conquered the entirety of the British Isles. But at that point, a glass of the black stuff was still just a pipe dream, and with no direct train routes from Flint, my timings from here on out would be crucial, because any missed train connection or late airport arrival could render the whole challenge a complete failure. And as I arrived back at the station, I had very real reasons to worry.
Now this part of the journey is where things could get pretty interesting. I've got to make 3 stops, and at the 3rd stop up in Carlisle, there's some major engineering works going on, so there could be some replacement services running today. I can't really afford to lose too much time on such a strict schedule, but we'll have to see how it goes. Goodbye Flint and goodbye Minty. This is just 1 stop to Chester, and then we change to get up to Warrington.
This short ride took me back the way I'd already driven and across the border back into England once again, which is not a new border, so it doesn't count.
Okay, next I need to get on the 1027 from platform 6 to Warrington.
This was another short journey to take me ever so slightly northwards, so I had just enough time to scoff a light breakfast and admire the countryside views before the train came to a stop.
Right then, made it to Warrington. Got about 25 minutes wait now to the next train up to Carlisle, and then we might start getting some of those problems. Fingers crossed we don't, but I really don't know.
This next longer leg of the journey was on a much fancier train, complete with reserved seating, even though my particular booking wasn't quite as described.
It's almost a window seat.
Luckily, being a Tuesday, the carriage wasn't that busy, and I bagged a more scenic view for the rest of my journey. So from this window, I watched the northern English towns roll by before we really picked up some speed, which after an action-packed morning felt like a great time for a tactical nap. And I should probably explain why the hell I'm even doing this. You see, for the best part of the last few years, I've spent my time living abroad. And since returning home to the UK, I was feeling a kind of, let's call it, reverse culture shock. So I was looking for some way, some sort of trip to reconnect with my homeland, and a mad British sightseeing adventure to places I'd never seen sounded like just the ticket. And this section of railway running alongside the Yorkshire Dales was so genuinely beautiful that I didn't even bother to nap at all. But sadly, I couldn't enjoy the views for long. A casual check of my train app revealed something that I had been dreading. My next train from Carlisle was apparently not a replacement service at all. It had been completely cancelled instead. I found some buses scheduled for later in the day, but the timings didn't work for my flight, and a taxi ride into Scotland was out of the question because I'd already crossed one border by car. So I was left wondering just what would be waiting for me on the other side, and how much would I need to improvise to get myself into Scotland. At this point, I braced myself for the worst, until
Any customers for Glasgow or Edinburgh, please?
I was saved. There was a full bus replacement to take us all onwards and into bonny Scotland, which was not only a relief from a timings point of view, but it also presented a new, unexpected mode of transport to cross the next border. As I climbed onto the bus itself, the driver requested that any bigger bags be stored in the lower compartment, and from this response, there was no doubt that I was heading in the right direction.
It's got my bagpipes in it, I really don't know.
So, accompanied by bagpipes, I was back on the road in an unplanned but still legitimate mode of transport, leaving the border town of Carlisle and crossing the boundary into Scotland. Now, as I've already mentioned, I had previously visited Scotland's capital city back in 2015, so that was ruled out of my plans. But I still needed a destination with a tourist attraction and a convenient airport. So luckily, I had never been to Scotland's second city, and just under 2 hours later, I arrived in Glasgow. Home of the worst toilet in Scotland, the Old Firm Derby, and until recently, one of the highest crime rates in the whole of the UK. In fact, there's double the amount of violent crime here than in the entirety of Wales. Glasgow promised to be another memorable stop on my journey, but hopefully for the right reasons. I jumped off the bus at the central station and headed towards the east of the city for yet another tourist activity.
Well, against all odds, I've made it to the city of Glasgow in Scotland, which is country number 3. So basically, here's the plan. I have a flight at 8:25 this evening to take me from Glasgow over to Belfast. So I basically have about 3 hours now to sightsee around this part of Scotland. And I think I've got a pretty cool idea of where to head to, but it is a little bit of a walk. So let's get going. And I might need some refreshment along the way.
It was a bit early for a dram at this point, so what better way to fuel my Glaswegian sightseeing than with Scotland's most beloved soft drink?
It's just good. It's just good.
Now, when I looked up the best things to do in Glasgow, most of them were day trips out of the city, so make of that what you will. But keeping along my historic sightseeing theme, I made my way towards a landmark in the quieter pastures of the city's cathedral quarter, a place that really was a world away from the pages of Trainspotting.
Just beyond the cathedral and up on a hill is the Glasgow Necropolis, which is an old graveyard for the Victorian elite. Lots of very famous and wealthy Scots are buried here. And granted, it is a bit of a weird choice for a tourist attraction, but supposedly by climbing right to the top of the hill, you get some really nice views. And besides that, even just at the entrance here, it's very, very atmospheric. Oh, I'm glad I had that iron brew to carry me up. Feeling strong. Well, this place is quite something. It's way bigger than I thought it was going to be. There's just rows and rows, just thousands of statues and headstones. And of course, the views are incredible. It was worth the climb.
I did plan on waiting up on the hill for sunset, but my journey was starting to catch up with me at this point, and I hadn't really eaten anything on the trip so far. So I started to think about some supper of the liquid variety.
So that is the sightseeing done in Scotland, and I think it's time for a proper drink. And this place just over my shoulder is the Tennant's Brewery, which is the most famous lager brewer in Scotland. Now, unfortunately, that particular place is closed on Tuesdays, but this whole area behind me is a bit of a brewery district. So I'm going to head down there and see if I can find a refreshing drink.
And I found the perfect place in the form of the Dry Gate, which I later discovered is what Tennants call their craft beers. And I've got to say, at this point, my taster flight felt very well deserved. I also ordered some haggis bonbons to get the full tartan experience. But once again, I had to be careful not to get carried away, because I still had a different kind of flight to catch. And across the final border, there was yet another tourist attraction that needed visiting before the clock struck midnight. So at that point, I called myself a taxi and got back on my way.
Okay, the Uber is on its way. So last mode of transport, last country. Let's do it.
But things weren't quite going to plan. I'd left just enough time to get over to the airport, and my driver was struggling to find me.
Bloody Uber driver's at the wrong gate. He's at the Tennant's Brewery, not the Dry Gate. Wasting time.
I quickly ran around the large brewery complex and found my driver outside the main gates.
Hi.
And from there, finally, I was back on the road. For a few minutes at least. I was starting to get a bit anxious at this point, but once again, luck seemed to be on my side and the traffic started to move. Because soon enough, I was leaving the city lights of Glasgow behind for Celtic pastures new. And after a fun discussion with my Uber driver about Slovakian beers, it was time for my voyage to hit the skies.
Okay.
Good luck, boss.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. London.
No, Belfast. Belfast, yeah. Off to Ireland. Bye-bye. Here we go then. Glasgow International.
In the end, I actually arrived at the airport with some time to spare, which I decided to use in the most efficient way possible. I paired my delicious dram with some haggis pakoras, which were actually dreadful if I'm honest, but there was no time for regrets, because soon enough it was time to say goodbye to the land of the jocks and board my final mode of transport.
It's just dawned on me now as I'm walking to the gate that this is actually possible. I can actually do this now.
Thank you.
The tiny Aer Lingus plane was only about half full, so almost as soon as I'd sat down, we were taking off and hanging above the Irish Sea, which meant that I was crossing the final and most contested border of the day. And in the distance, I could see the bright lights of my final destination, Belfast. The titanic and historically troubled capital of Northern Ireland today served as the grand finale of my British and Irish adventure. Now, much like the other countries, I had visited Northern Ireland before when I landed into Belfast back in 2017, but that was a different airport, and I also never actually set foot into the city itself, making it the ideal spot for my evening of sightseeing. As I touched down into simply the best airport around, I dreamed of a pub crawl that would do the Belfast Beetle proud, but my main mission wasn't over yet.
Come on then. One more thing to do. Train, attraction, Guinness.
George Best Airport is very close to the city centre and even closer to my chosen attraction, which I plan to reach by train. But what should have been a simple walk to the station started to get a bit stressful.
I mean, I am just hoping this is the way to the train station. Slightly worrying that nobody else is walking in this direction. Hopefully the trains are still running.
The signs went on and on until I ended up walking along the side of a busy road.
If all else fails, I am just following the motorway to the city, basically. That'd be good content. Okay, so I think the train station is across the road over there. There's a bridge coming up. There's a train coming in 4 minutes. That's the train coming in now.
This train is for Great Victoria Street. The next station is Titanic Quarter.
Made it. One stop.
Now, it was already pretty late into the evening at this point, and many of the attractions in the city were closed up for the day. But luckily, I had a solution to that problem in the shape of a genuine 4.5-star icon. So as the doors opened, I headed in the direction of my final stop on foot, towards a site that truly embodies the history and spirit of this great coastal city. But even though the end was in sight, I was starting to feel the pressure.
I need to get over the bridge, across the road, turn left. That's my microphone as well. It's all going wrong. It's all going wrong. Are we back? We're back. Right, yeah. So, I need to cross the bridge, get over the road, and oh wow, these are the shipyard cranes already. Okay, we are close. We are close. It's really starting to sink in now just how mental today's been. Right, well, I can see where I'm going. Just over there. You probably can't, but you will. Just look at the size of that. Jesus. We're crossing. Ah, it's green anyway. Good. Now, in case you hadn't drawn the connection yet, Belfast is where the Titanic was built. And the shipyards here are quite proud of that for some reason. Obviously, it was a huge feat of engineering at the time. Just didn't quite work out, did it? I'm pretty sure this is right. Let's cross again. Red man, red man, red man. Is it this way? Let's go down here anyway. Oh, I can't wait for bed. Actually, I don't know what I'm most excited for. Bed, beer, but it's definitely not this.
If you can't already tell, the adrenaline was pumping at this point, my legs were burning, and honestly, I just wanted this thing to be over with so I could get inside a cozy Irish pub before last orders. But there was actually a lot more to this area than I originally thought.
So very quickly, on my left here is the SS Nomadic, which is one of the ferries that took passengers onto the Titanic. So it looks similar, just smaller. Very cool, that's actually it. To be fair, that's probably cooler than the building we're heading towards, because that purple thing is the Titanic Museum, which is closed anyway, but it's just the iconic building that I wanted to aim for. And here it is. Oh my God. Oh.
I spent it in good company.
Made it. We've actually done it. Well, I'm very happy to announce that this is the final stop. Titanic Belfast.
And all the heart.
4 countries, 4 modes of transport in the end, in under 24 hours. We started at 6 AM, just about, and it is now 9:45. What a day. Now, let's do Georgie Best proud.
Number 1 rule, follow the sounds of live music. It's always the best place to go. So after 26,000 steps, 400 miles travelled and 2 hours to spare, it all ended in that warm, crack-filled cavern with a pint of the black stuff. But the truth is, after 16 hours of travelling, I didn't exactly paint the town red. In fact, not long after that pint, I was off to bed.